Welcome to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled you're joining me today because, well, we are going to unpack something truly profound and, frankly, a little unsettling. We hear all the time about how technology is connecting us, right? But today, we're setting the stage for a deep exploration into the darker, invisible mechanisms of modern digital dating. We're going to look at the hard sociological and psychological evidence that suggests something entirely different is happening just beneath the surface. So get ready, because we're diving into how the literal architecture of our screens might be fracturing our very sense of self.
To kick things off, I've got a number that should instantly grab your attention: 70.8%. According to recent surveys, that is the staggering percentage of Tinder users who have literally never met a match in person. Just let that sink in for a second. We're talking about the vast majority of people on a platform that is ostensibly designed for human connection, who are just entirely bypassing the actual physical connecting part.
And that brilliantly illustrates the core dilemma we're exploring today. It begs a massive question: are we connecting, or are we just playing a game? It completely forces us to challenge our basic assumptions about dating apps. I mean, if the goal isn't actually to go on a date, what on earth are millions of people doing on these platforms every single day? Today, we're going to trace our descent into this machine and see exactly how our psychology is being rewired.
Okay, let's dive into Section 1, the dating app slot machine. To really understand this first layer of our descent, we honestly just have to listen to the creators themselves. Tinder co-founder Jonathan Badeen once admitted, "You're excited to see who the next person is, or excited to see did I get the match." He openly compared the inner workings of his app to a casino slot machine. These creators intentionally built these platforms to function exactly like those highly addictive games of chance you'd find in Vegas. You aren't navigating a community anymore, you are pulling a digital lever.
So how does this psychological mechanic actually work? It's something called variable ratio reinforcement. When you swipe, you get unpredictable, frequent rewards, in this case matches. And this irregularity is incredibly powerful. It triggers this massive dopamine loop in your brain that motivates continuous, just compulsive swiping. It essentially turns the search for intimacy into a self-reinforcing addiction. The ultimate goal is simply winning a game and getting that temporary ego boost, rather than, finding a living, breathing human connection. But why has society so readily accepted this gamified system?
That brings us to Section 2, liquid love and emotional capitalism. Let's contrast these two concepts for a minute to see how we got here. Historically, we had traditional intimacy. Your identity was anchored tightly in your community, and there was a really high social cost if you just abandoned a relationship. But the renowned sociologist Zygmunt Bauman argues that today we live in an era of what he calls liquid love. Human bonds have been liquefied. They're fragile, highly fluid, hyper-individualized, and easily dissolved without practically any effort. Because of this, modern human connections have essentially been morphed into this hyper-commodified shopping experience.
And this builds perfectly into Eva Illouz's incredible theory of emotional capitalism. She explains that dating apps evaluate relationships strictly through economic models: bargaining, exchange, and utility. The apps turn your personal desirability into a literal monetized market. You're optimizing your profile photos like you're running a marketing campaign, which completely unanchors your intrinsic sense of self-worth and ties it entirely to digital validation and cold algorithms.
Which leads us into Section 3. The Horcrux of casual intimacy. We are now moving into the deep psychological core of how this liquid, gamified market actually damages the human psyche. Now, you might recognize the term Horcrux from fantasy literature, a dark magic object used to house a piece of a split soul. But clinical sociologists and psychologists are increasingly using it as a profound clinical metaphor. It describes exactly what happens to the human ego during severe relational rupture, moral injury, or infidelity. It is an incredibly vivid analog for dissociation and deep psychological compartmentalization. Let's walk through exactly how this fracturing happens in the modern dating landscape. First, individuals split the self just to survive the pain of constant rejection or betrayal. Second, they encase that fractured identity in a secondary, compartmentalized world, kind of like a secret digital life. Third, over a lifetime of superficial hookups and gamified swiping, they accumulate thousands of these minor dissociative cracks. And finally, they try to mask this deeply painful loss of vital energy with compulsive behaviors, like endlessly chasing the next match. People are literally intentionally fracturing their psychological depth across superficial encounters as a defense mechanism against true vulnerability.
Now, it's really interesting in Section 4, neurobiology and defensive splitting.
We can take this psychological metaphor and bridge it directly to hard biological science. When we look at the actual data, we see a severe friction between our hardwired neurobiology and the cultural promise of consequence-free casual sex. Look at the contrast. Hookup culture expects a one-dimensional physical transaction, but the biological reality is a massive release of oxytocin and vasopressin. The culture demands complete emotional detachment, but our brains involuntarily trigger limbic bonding. The culture promises no strings-attached encounters, but clinically, individuals form deep soul ties or energy fingerprints that leave a lasting psychological residue.
Because of this intense neurobiological friction, individuals are forced into what's called defensive splitting. To survive the cognitive dissonance, people, especially women, who clinical research actually shows often have structurally larger limbic systems, defensively split their desires into mutually exclusive categories. They convince themselves they have to choose between professional success or romantic connection, or they split sexual pleasure completely away from emotional commitment. And this defensive posture entirely prevents integrated, healthy intimacy.
Let's move to Section 5, Ghosting and Emotional Anorexia.
This all forces us to descend into the ultimate fallout of this gamified, fractured system, the behavioral symptoms we are seeing everywhere today. Sociological research paints a pretty grim picture here. It says, ghosting serves as a highly rationalized, labor-saving choice, where human beings are treated as temporary consumer goods. And through the lens of social exchange theory, this makes perfect, terrifying sense. Because dating apps completely remove us from shared physical communities, the reputational cost of just abandoning someone drops to absolute zero. You can just disappear without facing any social consequences whatsoever.
So what's the end result of all this ghosting, the constant chase of the next digital match, and the trauma of a fractured identity? It hardens into what clinicians are calling emotional anorexia. This is extreme, dismissive, avoidant behavior. It's the rejection of relational intimacy entirely, born out of a pathological terror of being vulnerable. People learn to survive without deep connection, sure, but at the terrible cost of chronic emptiness, self-alienation, and treating human connections as completely disposable tokens.
Okay, it is time for some hope in Section 6, Reclaiming the Fractured Self.
It really isn't all doom and gloom. Let's look at some concrete solutions, because the sources give us very clear, actionable socio-clinical steps to starve this app's variable reward cycle. Step 1. Establish game loop interrupters. Set hard screen limits and turn off those notifications to break the slot machine effect. Step 2. Practice relational intentionality, often called slow dating. Actually take the time to know someone. Step 3. Choose accountability over ghosting. Do the hard work of communicating face-to-face. And Step 4. Deconstruct defensive splitting. Challenge that false idea that you have to choose between success and love, or pleasure and commitment.
I absolutely love this concept the sources introduced for healing. It's called kintsugi. It's the traditional Japanese art of repairing broken pottery with golden glue. Somatic therapies use this beautiful philosophy to help patients. Instead of hiding their digital trauma or feeling broken, patients consciously call back the split-off parts of their psyche. They repair their internal fractures, transforming their relational wounds into a totally unique, highly integrated resilience. It's a powerful way to heal.
Which leaves me with a final, highly provocative thought for you to take away today. As you navigate this fast-paced, highly commodified digital world, you have to ask yourself, will you continue to play the algorithm's game, treating yourself and others as disposable tokens? Or will you do the hard, beautiful work to reclaim your psychological depth? Think deeply about the digital architecture shaping your relationships. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I will catch you next time.